Hey, I've just watched a video by two brothers, Mo and ET, and it's called a prank video, but it's actually more like a social experiment in a sense. So basically, in this video, they have their younger brother, who I guess is a teenager, about 15, something like that. I don't know what age the young guy is, but I would assume about 14, 15. Anyway, they've set up this experiment in New York City where they put the young guy beside a homeless man, um, and it's basically and they also they they sort of get him to act like he is also homeless. So it's a way to see who people respond to. Um, Initially, they show a minute or so. No one responds to the homeless man. A lot of people respond to the homeless boy, and they give him change. Now, in a few of the incidents where people stop by, the homeless man, he's about 35, somewhere around that, says, I'm quite hungry today. Can you spare some change for me too? Not aggressive, not anything like that. And they either ignore him or, in some cases, are just outright aggressive towards him. Um, Two people particularly caught my attention. Firstly, was a so called police officer. I don't know if I don't think she was a regular officer, more like a beat officer. In the UK, we would call them community support officers, so they've limited powers of arrest and so on. Her behaviour was disgusting. What she basically done was went into a tirade against the guy about having a job, and not content with that, she actually struck him. Like she slapped him on the head and told him to get a job. And then after that, there was this guy came by. He gave the kid some change, but then again, it was the line to the homeless guy, "Get a job. I work every day," and that was one thing. But then he actually got his salad or his lunch, whatever it was, and poured it over the head of this homeless guy. Actually, poured it over the head of this homeless guy, and then in the next segment, the homeless guy he got up, and I thought, okay, he's going to, he's had enough. He's going to kind of get his own back on the guy, but no, he went to actually, with the small change he had, buy something for the kid because he assumed that the kid was also homeless. At that point, the two brothers came out and explained the situation, and the guy broke down and basically said, "I get this every day, this sort of treatment." Um, and this would all be bad enough, but this guy was a veteran. That's what he said anyway. And given the honest nature that you can see in the video, the fact that he goes to get food for the kid, I see no reason to disbelieve that. But there's a few things I want to say about that particular social experiment, but also about the issues of homelessness in general. This is something that is really a major social blight, and I want to talk a bit about it. Um, and I should say, there's no way I can cover every single issue here. There's a lot of issues. It's not black and white. It is complex. There's a lot of issues to talk about, but I just want to touch on some of some of these issues from my perspective and what I know. And I'll speak about my own experience in a second. I've never been homeless, but I've had some experience, and I'll come to that in a minute. Now, about this social experiment, I really applaud these brothers for doing this. And by the way, it had a good ending. At least that was one good thing, because the kid, of course, wasn't really homeless, and the change that he got, they then gave it to the homeless man. So that was one good thing. At least there was a good ending, and the guy was overcome with, relief. And um, but I wasn't the only one who felt really pissed off seeing the attitude of that police officer and the guy that assaulted him. I mean, I just can't understand the mindset of a law enforcement officer who would assault someone. There's been a lot of discussion about police brutality. Now, this wasn't outright brutality. She wasn't like beating him up, but she did assault him, and it really, really, really makes me angry when people say to the homeless, "Oh, just get a job," as if it is that simple. As if it's that simple. Do they really think it's a situation that a homeless person could just walk into an office and say, "Oh, please give me a job"? Do they really think it's as simple as, I mean, they don't even begin to scratch the surface of how difficult that is for someone in that position. Number one, the fact they've been homeless means they've been out of paid work for a considerable time. Employers look at that, they look at gaps in the record, they want to know why. And if the person's honest, they say, "I was homeless." Then the employer might think, okay, well, they're a drug addict. They're homeless because they were a criminal or whatever. I'm not saying all employers would do that, but some would. I think many would. That's problem number one. Problem number two, if a homeless person is suffering from substance abuse or other issues like that, and yes, people shouldn't do that. Yes, drugs are a plague, but you know what? No one is perfect. We all make mistakes in life. That's problem number two. Someone suffering those issues are obviously going to find it hard to keep down a job. Problem number three, I mean, if someone is coming in and all they have is the clothes on their back and they're filthy, a lot of employers are going to stick up their nose. So when people say, never mind, composing, I was going to say CV, a resume, how would they have access to a computer to compose a resume? There's a million different things that people don't consider when they come out with this fucking irritating line, "Get a job." It's just so fucking. It's easy if you're in a position where you are in stable work, and but for me, people just sticking their nose up and saying, "Get a job." They just don't know how difficult it is. Now I'll come to some of those issues in a minute, but um, I have to be honest, when I saw the guy throw his food over the homeless man, I felt red. I really saw red. And I was thinking, this fucker needs to be roughed up. I don't understand the mentality of anyone that can assault a homeless person. I mean, his logic was, "Oh, that's a kid, but you're a grown man like me, therefore it's okay for." That's bullshit. This idea that if someone's a grown man, that, oh well, it's fine. And I think it comes down to the problem of this regressive attitude of male disposability. That is to say, adult men should just tough it up and take it. We're all human beings. And it's not about being overly sensitive, it's just about being a decent fucking human being. And if I sound angry, it's because I am. If you see that and you cannot feel any ounce of unease, then you're not human. It's not a left wing, right wing issue. It's not a oversensitivity issue. It's just a human issue. Um, so kudos to those guys for making the video, and it is good that it's got a happy ending. As far as I'm concerned, that officer should be fired for professional misconduct. Even if she has her own political views on the homeless, the fact that she assaulted the guy is disgusting. And what the man done was even worse. Throwing his food over the homeless guy. And the thing is, these people probably justify it to themselves because of giving money to the kid. But it's absolutely. I'll just give you a word of warning. I'm going to be smoking a cigarette now. I know some people don't like that. Um, to be honest, I'm not a heavy smoker, but sometimes when I make videos like this, I like to be reflective, and that's all it is. So if you don't like smoking, apologies in advance. But you know what? I just feel like it. My channel, etc., etc. Um, yeah. So that's a real eye opener. And the thing is, this is a social experiment, but the guy really was homeless. He wasn't an actor. If he was an actor, it would still indicate just how shit people can be. But it also shows double standards. I mean, all these people were probably being self righteous, thinking they were giving money to the kid, but then turning their nose up at the man. If you're going to do that, if you're going to give money to a homeless person, don't ignore the person beside them. Or at least what I would do, honestly, hand on heart, if I only had a bit of change and I give it to one person, I would just say to the other person, "I'm sorry, that's all the change I have." But it's this idea of treating homeless people like pieces of dirt on the street. It makes me sick. I mean, I mentioned I mentioned that I'd had some experience. I've been homeless for a night on about two or three occasions. It hardly counts because it's not comparable to what, it's not true homelessness. But it is homelessness in the sense that I had nowhere to sleep. Um, the first occasion was in London at the Live 8 concert, which I mentioned in the previous video. Basically, what had happened was I missed my train. All the hostels were fully booked. I had to sleep rough that night. Very uncomfortable experience. I couldn't sleep because at the time there was reports that homeless people were being set on fire. I didn't want to risk that, so I literally just had to stay awake and wander around. It was rough. It was rough going. When I finally ended up at King's Cross Station when it opened, I was so shattered that I literally just fell asleep on the concourse. Um, and that was a rough night. Another time was in Paris. Similar thing happened. I missed the train because the machine wasn't working. And the third occasion was in Dusseldorf. So that's three occasions in three big cities where I've had, experience of sleeping rough. Believe me, it is uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people could probably relate to that. They've probably had some experience of missing trains but to have even an inkling of that and then to realize that there are people who go through this every single night is just, it's a real eye opener. There's a lot of films about the homeless, especially here in the UK. There's a lot of independent films, especially by realist directors like Mike Lee and Ken Loach. Homelessness, needless to say, is a real social blight, and it's not a new thing. It's been with humanity for probably for as long as we have had urbanization. Obviously, there's homelessness that comes about from earthquakes and so on, which is not the sort of homelessness I'm talking about. That's a natural disaster, or homelessness from war. But I'm talking more about the generic homelessness that exists in society at peacetime, at times when it's not. There's no particular big disaster or war or anything like that that has caused it. I mean, in London during the Blitz, a lot of people were made homeless, but that was, from warfare. That wasn't from social policies or anything like that. Um, Guardian newspaper made a report in July last year. It said that in London, the number of rough sleepers has went up from, and they were quoting. Let me just get this right. Just bear with me a second, please. Just try to get the split screen. I'm still getting the hang of this. Um, yeah, they were quoting figures from excuse me, the Department for Communities and Local Government. So this is a direct government resource. It isn't some sort of left wing speculation or anything like that. Um, and the figures have, this is 2015, 7,500 rough sleepers in London. That's up from 3,673 in the 09-10 period. So that's almost a doubling, 7,500 rough sleepers. Now, the thing about rough sleepers is they are really what when you think of homeless people, is rough sleepers that people think of. Actually, a lot of homeless people, probably the majority, are not sleeping rough, but they're vulnerably housed. That is to say, they're couch surfing. They are um, they're in hostels, they're in YMCA's, that sort of thing. But they're still classed as homeless because they don't have any permanent residence. Now, obviously, that is still better than being on the streets. Um, Anyone who's come back, from a bus station or train station or work on a cold winter night will know what that is like. Now try imagine sleeping out in that. It just um when I studied in the West Midlands, I did spend some time in a homeless shelter, not for myself, just as sort of volunteer work. It wasn't very long. It wasn't, I don't want to make a big thing out of it because it was a very brief time, but I got an impression of some of the situations people have been in, and there's a lot of misconceptions about the homeless. What people need to understand is that this is not simple. Um, the fact of the matter is, yes, there are people who are homeless because of their own foolish life choices. And, not every homeless person is particularly sympathetic. There are homeless people that have committed serious crimes who've done unredeemable things. and they've ended up on the street that way. But there are also people who have ended up on the street because they've fallen through the cracks. It could be that they've went through a divorce and they were living in an area where their partner, had all the sympathy. And I've heard of company executives ended up homeless. I've heard of inventors ending up homeless. And we've all heard of veterans ending up homeless, people who have served their country, people who've risked their life for their country. It's just morally perverse. Um, this is not to say that society is cold and brutish and no one cares. A lot of people, I think, care, but as that video showed, as the experiment video showed, and I'll try and put a link in this, there are also a lot of scumbags out there who do things that they would not do to other people. And I mentioned the fallacy of the argument about get a job, but I just can't comprehend the mindset of someone who would attack a homeless person. It's different if you get an aggressive beggar and they're using intimidation or threats to try and get money. That's totally different. That's self-defense. But if a homeless person is simply sitting on their blanket or they're, you know, on a street corner and someone wants to kick them or throw food over them, I just can't get my head around that. I can't get my head around how sick some people are. And it is extremely cowardly because they know it's very unlikely that there'll be any sort of justice. I hope the two brothers that posted that video pass this on to the police and get that piece of shit arrested that threw his food over the homeless guy. There must be some laws against that. There must be. There should be. I personally think that attacking a vulnerable person should be an extra. There should be extra harsh consequences for that. Um, but there aren't simple issues here. I understand that there are situations where homeless people maybe are offered help and they don't take it. Now, that is true. And it could be that people, they've just given up. They're at the bottom of society and they no longer care. I have been in situations where I have offered contact details. I've spoken to homeless people directly and offered them contact details for shelters and so on. And they weren't interested. Um, so it is true, there are homeless people that will want money solely to buy drugs or alcohol. But quite frankly, if you're in that position, you want something to numb the pain. And that doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that they should do that. But most human beings, when they are tested, will find some way to cope with that sort of pressure. And if it's a choice between shivering at night time and being fully sort of aware of your situation and or getting drunk, blindingly drunk and not caring, I think a lot of people would choose the latter. So I think it's people shouldn't be too judgmental of the homeless when they do these things. Because like I say, everyone when they're tested will do things to cope. This is basic human nature. This is not something that can be solved overnight, and it certainly isn't something that can be solved by simply giving money to people on the street. I try to avoid doing that, or if I do it, I I will do it and say something like, I can give you information about where there's a shelter. I can give you this number, and it's very, very minimal, but I try to do what I can. And the thing is, I'm hardly in this financially comfortable position myself. I just can't get my head around people who have such a shit attitude to someone in that position. I'm not saying that everyone should be overly sympathetic and sort of just throw out money because it isn't that simple. That is an artificial solution. But at the very least, people should understand that homeless people are like any other group of people. They're just people who have fallen on hard times. Yes, there are some homeless people who are unsympathetic, and like I say, they may have committed serious crimes and they're there because they've been thrown out of their house or whatever. Um, but people shouldn't jump to conclusions about people they don't know. So they shouldn't say, I'm walking past this homeless person, oh, they're just some drug addict. There are a lot of complex issues behind this. As for relief that is provided, that is also limited. I mean, in the case of the YMCA, for instance, they do a lot of good work, but they have some age restrictions. I think, for instance, they provide shelter to people who are 25 and under. people over that don't necessarily have that option. Um, there are a lot of complex issues, and I wish people would try and understand that it is not black and white. It's just not. And I agree, it shouldn't be a case of being naive and just giving them money and thinking that will solve the problem. And that, like I said, there are people who are in that situation because they've made bad life choices. But there are other people who are there through no fault of their own because they have had an unfortunate series of events and they've fallen through the cracks. No one should ever be smug and look down on the homeless and think it can't happen to them. It can happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone. And there have been some good initiatives. I mean, the big issue was a very good idea because it helped the homeless to earn money, which took away some of that stigma. Um, but government policies have an effect on this. I believe the Tory cuts have had a huge effect on a lot of social issues. That goes without saying. When they are cutting police numbers, when they're cutting um, funding the hospitals, when they are making cuts across the board. The May government, not so much, but this was especially the case under Cameron and Osborne. Anyone that thinks that isn't going to have some sort of social impact is just kidding themselves. And those figures, they're not Guardian figures, they're from the government itself. 3,673 to 7,500 is a major increase. And London isn't even the worst. I imagine it's far worse in Paris, from what I've heard. And the truth is, it's a problem in every major city in the world. Um, it is true there are other issues. You get fakers, you get people who pretend to be homeless and pretend to be veterans in order to get money. But I would still rather give someone the benefit of the doubt than be overly cynical. And I mean, what I do, I'm not going to lie. I am not in a position to give out money to people or to buy food for people all the time. But I will at least try to treat them like human beings. The other day, I walked past a homeless guy. He asked for change. I said, honestly, I don't have change. And I apologized to him. It's not because people take this attitude, it's all about what do they do to deserve it. Put yourself in their shoes. I don't give a damn if you're a hardworking taxpayer because you can fall through the cracks and find that you're in exactly the same position. So this slandering of the homeless pisses me right off. Anyway, I walked past the guy and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't have change," and that was the truth at that time. And he was very polite. He didn't get aggressive. Um, aggressive beggars. No, I don't. That's a different matter because that comes to mutual respect. But people who stick their nose up, it just pisses me off because they just don't get that it isn't that black and white. Go and get a job. Try putting yourself in that position and going and getting a job. It really is not that simple. To get a job, you need to provide a resume, you need to show work experience, you need to show all sorts of things. People who say go and get a job don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And I'm sorry to be blunt about it, but that's how I feel. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I've covered a lot of issues, and I'm sure there's many, many other issues I can cover. Um, I'm not saying that just giving homeless people money is the answer. I'm not saying that all homeless people are sympathetic. There are people that probably are assholes that are homeless, right? Um, and there are homeless people who have done terrible things. But there are also many homeless people who are there because they have fallen through the cracks. It happens. And even if your politics is that, oh well, they're there for their own, it's their own fault or whatever. Even if that's your politics, to actually go to the extent of throwing food over someone, to degrade someone in that way, I think that's disgusting. I think it is utterly disgusting. And my honest instinct on saying that was I want to smack the guy. I really did. So, the issues aren't black and white, but people shouldn't jump to conclusions about total strangers. There's many homeless people probably hate the idea that they have to resort to that, to begging. There are a lot of good charities out there that do a lot of good work. The Samaritans, excuse me, not the Samaritans, the Salvation Army, Centre Point, St Mungo's. There's other organisations. So there are decent people who know this is a problem. They're trying to do something about it. I also would say that homeless people who refuse help are, it's hard to understand that as well. If I'm in that position, I'm not going to refuse any help. People need to swallow their pride. If you're in a desperate situation, take any help you get. Um, I'll leave it there, and I'll put a link to that video and let me know your thoughts. Cheers.